Hello and welcome to today's lesson where we're looking at Fiedler's contingency theory of leadership. Now, Fiedler's contingency theory of leadership states that your effectiveness as a leader is determined by how well your leadership style matches the situation you find yourself in. Now, it isn't the only contingency theory. Contingency theory is actually a bunch of theories which say that there is no one singular best leadership style. They generally say that the best leadership style will be contingent on the situation you find yourself in. Now, it's important to realize that in Fiedler's contingency theory, your leadership style is fixed. You cannot change your style to suit the situation. Instead, the theory says that you must put leaders into situations that match their preferred style. Now, this puts the theory at odds with more modern contingency theories, such as situational leadership. Now, to use the model, there are two things you need to determine, and the first is your leadership style, and the second is the favorableness of the situation you find yourself in. So let's examine each of those in a little bit more detail. So, first we have determining your leadership style. Now, to do this, Fiedler developed a scale called Least Preferred Coworker, or LPC for short. And to score yourself on this scale, you have to describe the coworker with whom you least prefer to work. So you can do this right now. Ask yourself, what do you think about the person you least prefer working with? Well, according to this model, the more favorably you rated the person you least prefer to work with, then the more relationship-oriented you are. But the less favorably you rated the person you least like working with, the more task-oriented your leadership style is. So in a nutshell, if you have a high LPC, you're a relationship-oriented leader, or that's your natural style, and a low LPC means you're naturally a more task-oriented leader. Now, task-oriented leaders tend to be good at organizing teams and projects and getting things done. Relationship-oriented leaders tend to be good at building good relationships and managing conflict to get things done. Now, the next step, or the final step of the model, is to understand the favorableness of the situation you face. And this is determined by how much control over the situation you have as a leader. And determining situational favorableness is done by examining the following three factors. So firstly, leader-member relations. And this factor measures how much your team trusts you. Greater trust increases the favorableness of the situation, and less trust reduces it. Next, we have task structure, and this factor measures the tasks that need to be performed. Are they clear and precise, or are they more vague? Now, vague tasks decrease the favorableness of the situation, whereas concrete tasks increase the favorableness of the situation. And finally, we have position power, and this is determined by your authority, meaning the power you have to reward or punish your subordinates. Now, as you might expect, having more power increases the situational favorableness. So let's look at how you actually use the model in practice, and there are three steps to use the model. And the first is to identify your leadership style, or your preferred leadership style, using the LPC scale. And to do that, you can use the table shown here to score how you feel about the person that you least like to work with. So as you can see, if you think someone is really pleasant, you might score them a 7 or an 8. And if you think they're quite unpleasant, you might score them a 1, 2, or maybe a 3. And so you fill in all the scores for this table, and then you tot up your results to come up with a total number. And then you can see where you fit on the scale. Now, if you score 73 or above, then you're a relationship-oriented leader. If you score 54 and below, then you're a task-oriented leader. And if you find that you're between 55 and 72, then actually you're a mixture of both types of leader, and it's up to you to determine which style you feel suits you best. So step 2 is to understand your situation And you can do this by asking these questions. Now, is trust with your team high or low? Are tasks vague or are they clear-cut and well understood? And finally, is your authority low or is your authority high? And the easiest way to answer these questions is to score each on a scale from 1 to 8, just like before, with 8 representing the highest value and 1 obviously the lowest. And now that we've understood how we like to lead, and we also understand the situation we're facing, we're in a position to determine if we have the right style for the situation we're facing. Now, this table is showing us what Fiedler found to be the best leadership style given different combinations of situational factors. Now, it's important to realize that the red line in this diagram represents task-oriented leaders, and the yellow line represents relationship-oriented leaders. Now, in general, what you can see from this diagram is that when situations are highly favorable or highly unfavorable, then the task-oriented leader is the most effective. It's only in the middle area where situational factors are mixed that the relationship-oriented leader is the most effective. Now, from Fiedler's perspective, you would place leaders into situations that are the most suited to their style. However, a more modern approach is to adapt your style according to the situation you're facing. So let's look at a couple of examples to bring all of this to life. So in this first example, we're going to imagine that you've been newly appointed as the manager of a pizza restaurant. And in this scenario, we might expect the following situational factors. So trust will be low, and that's because you're new to the job, and so your team won't trust you. Secondly, staff turnover is high, so it's going to be difficult to build strong relationships. Task structure will be high, and that's because there are extremely clear operating procedures to follow, covering everything from how to make each pizza and how to welcome customers to the restaurant. And finally, position power will be high, and that's because as the manager, you'll have the ability to hire and fire and reward and punish as you feel necessary. Now, according to Fiedler's contingency theory, looking at the diagram we looked at on the last slide, a relationship-oriented leader is best suited to this type of role. So let's take a look at another example. So in this scenario, we're going to imagine that you've just been promoted to be the manager of a software development team that you've been working in for 2 years. Now, the situational factors in this scenario might look something like this. So trust will be high, and that's because you've already worked with the team for 2 years, know each of the team members well, and because of that, they trust you. Task structure will be high, and that's because even though software development is complex, task structure is high as the team workers know what they have to do each week. And finally, position power is low. So although you've been promoted to manage the team's day-to-day work, you're not actually responsible for line management of any of them. And so you don't hold much formal authority over any of them. You can't fire them if they underperform, for example. So based on those situational factors and using the table we looked at before, a task-oriented leader is best suited to this type of role. So let's take a look at the advantages and disadvantages of the theory. So in terms of advantages, it provides a simple rule of thumb for identifying which leaders are best for which situations. Unlike many other leadership theories, it takes the situation into account in determining the effectiveness of a leader. And both the LPC and the situational factors are pretty easy to measure. Now, in terms of disadvantages, it's not flexible at all. So if your leadership style doesn't match the situation, then that's it. Game over. You need to be replaced. There is nothing you can do to change the situation. Also, the LPC scale is subjective, and so it's possible to incorrectly assess your own leadership style. If you happen to fall in the middle of the LPC scale, then there's no real guidance as to what to do to determine which kind of leader you might be. That's entirely up to you. And finally, your assessment of the situation is also subjective, so it means you might incorrectly assess the situation, and consequently you may incorrectly determine what kind of leader is required. So in summary, Fiedler's contingency theory of leadership states that your effectiveness as a leader is determined by how well your leadership style matches the situation. The theory is based on the premise that each of us has one and only one leadership style, which can be scored on the least preferred coworker scale, or LPC scale. Now, using this scale, you are either a relationship-oriented leader or a task-oriented leader. And according to Fiedler, task-oriented leaders get the best results when faced with strongly favorable or strongly unfavorable situations. And in situations of mixed favorableness, then relationship-oriented leaders get the best results. So that's it for this lesson. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.